Hello, my delicious co-creators. Lilou here. I'm in beautiful Sedona at the Biocybernaut Institute with Dr. Hardt. Hello, Dr. Hardt.
Hello, Lilou.
We're doing a part 2 because this is so interesting. We're talking about the brain makeovers. And I'm here with Dr. Hardt, that is the author of The Art of Smart Thinking, but also the founder and this researcher that put together the Biocybernaut Institute to raise our alpha and our theta waves for us to thrive. So thank you for doing that. And the second part, I wanted you to do it particularly on the forgiveness process that happens in those chambers. So if you want to hear more about what is alpha wave and how this can help us and all the technology behind it and your research, we've tried to do our best in this first part of the interview. So here it's more specifically on the forgiveness, which is extremely interesting because we've heard from many people how important forgiveness is and how it can change our lives. And we have all attempted that, I think, to some levels, all of us. We try to forgive a loved one for having left us. We try to let go of this soul that died just suddenly, and we didn't have time to say bye-bye. And there is all those things that we've done, but here I've never seen anything that deep. Why do you call that extreme forgiveness, and what really happens so that we can go to those deeper levels like never before?
That's because the forgiveness occurs in a state of rising alpha. We set it up that way. There was a Gallup poll done. Every so often, when Sir John Templeton was alive, he would promote his dear friend George Gallup to do a poll on forgiveness every couple of years. And I read one of the results in some detail. And George Gallup found that 80% of Americans felt that forgiveness was extremely important. If you give them a choice, 0 not at all, 1 a little, 2 moderately, 3 quite a bit, 4 extremely, 80% said it was extremely important. But then, of those people who thought it was extremely important, that was 80%, 85% of those people could not do it on their own. Not even prayer correlated with effective forgiveness. Of the things Gallup asked about, he didn't ask about the Biocybernaut training, but of the things he asked about, there was only one thing that correlated with effective forgiveness, and that was meditative prayer. Now, when you say meditative in any verb, like meditative sewing, meditative fishing, meditative gardening, what I see are increased alpha waves. And so in a sense, if you can read George Gallup's results, he's telling us that effective forgiveness requires increasing alpha waves. Now, the way because it's not a faith-based reason, it's an empirical, scientifically based process because it works. It eliminates trauma. And the way it started was in 1985. We had a woman, she was actually a migrainer, one of the migraine women, and she was doing alpha suppression. She was a very sweet lady, very, very kind. And so
alpha suppression, we have to explain that a little bit, but it's you start with that little why?
Well, there are a variety of reasons, because often you'll learn what not to do. Okay, and often in suppression, trying to lower your alpha, people will try a wider variety of things, which this woman did. So it was time for the interview at the end of the session, and this sweet lady was madder than a wet hen. She was just steamed, and I thought you said this alpha was good. And I go, well, what? And she said, well, when I thought about bad things, my alpha went up. And I go, oh, really? Tell me, what bad things did you think about? And she goes, well, I thought of everybody who ever did me dirty. And I brought them in one at a time, and I sat them down in front of me, and then I forgave them. And I go, excuse me, you're doing forgiveness and you think that's a bad thing? And she goes, and so she taught me that forgiveness raised alpha. So over the years, I've suggested to people to do alpha, and I've collected the best, most effective methods, and we now have a 14-step method for doing forgiveness. And if you like, I can describe it.
Yeah, please do,
I won't do all the individual steps, but basically, you convene a court, you bring in some high beings as judges. It could be angels or whatever. They need to be flawless beings. And then you bring in a perpetrator, somebody who wronged you, somebody who hurt you, somebody who traumatized you. You bring them into the court and you accuse them. And you feel the pain of that. Now, if you feel the pain effectively, your alpha's going to drop. And the way the computer is set up, your scores will turn white. So if you get white scores, that means you've connected to the pain. If you don't get whites, that means you're armored or defended against or whatever. You can try one more time. If you don't get it, you drop it and come back later. Go to something easier. But let's say you get your whites. Then you flip over and you start forgiving. You can say, I forgive you. You can say, I love you. You can walk in their shoes. You can realize they weren't playing with a full deck. Maybe they were young. Whatever the reason. And if the forgiveness is working, your alpha's going to go up. If it doesn't go up, then whatever you're doing isn't forgiveness. That's why this is so effective, because you're getting feedback on whether it's working or not. And if the alpha's going up, your scores are going to be blue or maybe even green.
Yeah.
And so you keep going.
What I found particularly interesting is the court thing came in, and you can set it up wherever you want in your imagination.
Yes.
But what was really effective is that you have to go back. If they say, you have to go back there and do the process again. And the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time, I guess, or the fifth time for some people, when you redo it, this is when you really get to the stuff you've never seen before.
Exactly.
Like even on a soul level, you can see some things, or wherever, I guess, wherever you're ready to go. But this is quite something.
So you're forgiving. You've felt the pain, you're forgiving, your alpha's going up. At a certain point, you're going to run out of ways to forgive, and your alpha's going to drop. And if you get at least 4 of your 6 scores turning white, then you go to the judges and you say, have I done all I can do for now? For now. And if they say yes, then you can go on to the next charge. If even one of them says no, you have to go back, feel the pain again, and start over.
And you can't fool these guys, clearly. I mean, I tried. I just had to go back several times. But
and then you go deeper.
Yeah, you go deeper. Yeah. And that's where really it makes perfect sense what happened and why you had to go through and why this person chose that scenario, why you met and connect. And it's so liberating, Jim.
You free yourself and them.
You free yourself and mainly, and there is the forgiveness, self-forgiveness too, right?
Very important to forgive yourself. People have such judgments against themselves, often harder on themselves than others. Yeah. So yes, it's important to forgive yourself.
Yeah. Why is alpha again kicking in sometimes when we're just really feeling that pain? Sometimes the alpha kick in.
Oftentimes people have suppressed anger.
Yeah.
And so when you're starting to feel the pain, you might get angry. Anger that you have suppressed. Yeah. Now, alpha loves truth-telling. And so if you're telling the truth about a repressed anger, the alpha will go up, which means you're not ready to forgive. You got to get through the anger first.
So there is a whole...
You come back to it a little later or the next day.
Yeah. There's so many people, it seems, in our lives, in our daily lives, that we haven't forgotten. And the list is long, even for some of us that have been doing some work for decades and decades.
One time I had a woman come for training who, on the first day, I'm telling of the group, forgiveness is a major theme of the training. And she took her pen and threw it and goes, I wish I had known. And I go, what do you mean? What's wrong with forgiveness? She goes, Jim, you don't know this, but I've just spent the last 2 years getting a master's degree in forgiveness. And 6 days a week, I've done forgiveness by every method known to man. And frankly, I don't think there's much for me to learn in forgiveness. And I go, well, you're here for the week, so why not to give it a try? And so she goes, all right. So she goes into the chamber and she starts forgiving, and it was so powerful. Her alpha went rocketing up, really powerful. She learned so fast. And she went deeper with all the forgivenesses than she'd ever done before. And she even found some things to forgive that her ego had kept hidden in that 2-year master's degree forgiveness program.
We suppress a lot of these emotions, huh? I mean, a lot of anxiety and stress, and we take some pills, or we pretend it's not happening, or alcohol, or what have you, to just put that on the side and but this is just survival, huh?
Well, it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And, it's for somebody who's got incredible anxiety and they take a pill or they, drink some wine or, some whiskey, it temporarily will moderate the bad feelings. Now, of course, it does harm to your body. Your liver doesn't like the alcohol. Yeah. And then it can actually become addictive. Yeah.
Tell us about some tests done with some people smoking marijuana, actually coming in the chamber, and they were doing pretty well in alpha waves, with alpha waves at the beginning. No?
At one point, I ran San Francisco State students in a study, and this was in the 70s, and they would come in and they report their drug use, and it was like a pharmacopoeia. There was just like a lot of stuff. And so some of them would actually stand out on the porch of the building and smoke a joint and then come in. Now, what I found then was the marijuana would raise the alpha levels, so their baselines would be higher, but it would impair their learning ability. So with marijuana, they wouldn't be able to use the feedback to learn, even though the starting alpha level would be a little higher.
So it would be short term.
Short term. Also, as little as one beer 24 hours ago would lower the alpha levels the next day.
And garlic?
Well, garlic is really bad for alpha.
Yeah.
When I was doing...
How long does it stay in the blood, you know?
That I don't know, but certainly 12 hours. In most meditation traditions, they discourage people from using onion and garlic because it is said to promote busy mind or a rajasic temperament. Yeah. And we find that true in alpha.
Yeah, it seems that our society, really, and we're all like that, trying to find a quick fix.
Yep.
Trying to always find the quick answer, or just feeling good by this glass of wine, or by this joint, or by maybe pornography or sex or what have you. But we're talking here, in 7 days of your program, that is the equivalent of 40 years of meditation, which is a huge statement.
Yes. And
it's actually quite quick, so people are looking for quick fixes, But you're saying this has, over time, like it's stabilized, right? Like the learning, where you're at in your brain capacity will remain and will stay stable. Well, like you don't need to continue to meditate or do some other exercise or focus on your alphas or.
When I ran the federal grant, it was double blind.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't even interact with the people because I'd made up the hypotheses. So we had other people run the research subjects. And since it was double blind, when they would leave, some of the women would say, "Oh, this is so wonderful. What can I do to keep this going?" And the technicians had to go, they couldn't even say meditate. And so with no instructions of any kind, 6 months later, they're further improved. 12 months later, further improvements with no instructions. Now, if you do meditate, that's probably going to be helpful. And I was going to say, if you clean up your diet, that'll be helpful too. Now, we don't give instructions for that. But in Canada, we surveyed the Aboriginals 6 months after their training. They were eating more fresh fruits and vegetables, less sweets, less junk food, about the same amount of meats and grains. They were wearing smaller clothing sizes. And so these are just spontaneous changes which came along kind of for free when they improved their brain functioning.
Yeah. Since the Institute, is in Germany for now, at least in 3 places, and probably more later, but you have Germany, Sedona, Canada. Are the patterns the same related to forgiveness or increasing the brainwaves? Are we all human beings?
A smile means the same in any culture,
Yeah.
and alpha means the same for everyone. It's liberating, it's connecting to life.
It works as well? Or there is some culture that are more resistant to it? Like maybe in Europe, is it more resistant, or are we going through more stuff?
Well, Europeans tend to be a little bit more formal, so there's a little bit less hugging. But when the alpha kicks in, there's hugging in Europe as well.
Is this all about the hugging, Jim? Come on, you want to get more hugs? Is it?
Hugging is good. But you can do the training without it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, is there any other stories or things you want to tell us? Because I know there's been some special people coming here to the Institute. Is there any special things you want to let us know?
Well, I could tell you about the pattern for seeing angels.
Yeah, okay.
There is a pattern which, if I see it in the brainwaves, it's complex. It involves the centrals, left and right, both of them being higher than the occipitals. Now, in 80% of the people, the occipitals are the biggest, so this is a rare pattern. But when people come in like that, and there's enough power, whenever I ask them, "Do you see angels?" they always say yes. In fact, at one point, I had the privilege of doing this training for 2 12-man teams of U.S. Army Green Berets.
They saw angels?
Well, there was one of the 24 soldiers, which I did a baseline session first, and then a private interview with each one. And this guy, big skinhead killer dude, totally buffed, and he had this pattern. And so he's sitting across the desk from me, and I go, "Do you talk to beings that other people don't see?" And it was like I'd hit him with a 2x4. He went back, almost tipped over in his chair, and he's like nervous and like, oh, how do you know? And he had a martial arts spirit guide, an old Asian master that showed up to coach him in his martial art training. And he'd only told his best buddy on pain of death if he would ever spill the beans. And so I could read it in the brainwaves. We also had a San Francisco 49er football player who didn't have the pattern when he started, and on day 5 it developed. And then he had 3 angels show up in the chamber.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jim. Thank you very much
Most
for
welcome.
this moment here in Biocybernaut, and I really appreciate this conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Much love to all of you guys. We love you. We send you so much love from beautiful Sedona.